the SeahawksDraftBlog.com and the BBC joins us on the show today live. Guys, get your comments in here. Flood the comments section in. We're going to get to a bunch of Q&As later on in the show, but we got a lot to talk about today with Rob. Mike Macdonald's first year, going to get his overall impression. Obviously, the news of Ryan Grubb firing. So, who is next in line for that job? There's been a few candidates popping up. We're going to get Rob's thoughts on that. And then the ongoing discussion about Geno Smith and the quarterback situation. What's the future there? Do we go in heavy and start getting that ball rolling now? Or do we kick the can down the road? We're going to get Rob's thoughts on all that and your Q&As. Just before that, guys, if you're watching the channel, don't forget to go down, hit the subscribe button, like button, share the videos, all that stuff really helps the channel. And everybody who has been supporting the channel, we can't thank you enough. We appreciate it. And so on the other side, Rob Staton.
So y'all can sit here and ask me all the questions y'all want to.
Don't you ever talk about me!
Yeah, let's go. It's go time, baby.
Geno steps up, takes that shot to the end zone. It is Metcalf.
I'm just about that action, boss.
You ready to go get it. You just like to do it.
That's what it is.
Off me.
Nobody in the world can do it.
Are you kidding me? Trying to do that. Pass is caught back in. Jackson Smith is jigged on. The circus music rolls in. Throw it with Baldwin. Oh my goodness, he caught it. By Leonard Williams.
This is the Hawk Zone Rundown with your hosts, Ryan and Bryce.
So rundown with us today, joining us, Rob Staton back on the show. Rob, appreciate you coming back, man, talking Hawks with us.
Anytime, guys. Great to be here. Yeah, there's a lot to get into, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the season just ended, but you know how it is in the offseason. It's almost like it just gets busier. So, and, Mike Macdonald wasting no time. A lot of us have talked about the firing of Ryan Grubb, and a lot of people saw it coming. I know you've talked about it on your show for a long time. We've talked about it, and we thought, Grubb was inevitable. And then it happened. But before we get into some of that, just overall, you'd look at the win total, 10 wins. But, if you break that down, you kind of see, a lot of the wins, we really didn't beat anybody with a winning record aside from Denver, first game of the year, Bo Nix, rookie QB, and then obviously the last game of the year with the Rams backup. So, Bryce and I were reserved to throw out a win total as like the mark of how successful or unsuccessful the season was. Give us your overall just assessment of Mike's first year as a head coach, more specifically, and then just the overall year for the Hawks here.
I think you're right not to look at it in terms of win-loss. I think the defense playing better than it has done is really encouraging for the future. That was the absolute bare minimum you needed to see when you change the coach and you bring in a defensive-minded head coach. The defense had to look better, and it did. So there's a lot of positives there in terms of the defense. Offensively, I think it's the same old. For a long time now, the Seahawks offense tends to play in fits and starts. They do have the talent and the players to have the occasional big play or the occasional very good game where everything comes together. But ultimately, there's no real, what are the Seahawks? When you watch the Seahawks offense, what are they? What is their identity? What is it that they hang their hat on? What is it that the opponent is terrified of facing week to week? They've got to get the offense sorted. And that's incredibly hard to do when you are, again, looking for another offensive coordinator. You don't have brilliance in a young, cheap quarterback, and you're kind of just sort of muddling along year to year, waiting for the opportunity to strike in that regard. So I think, defensively very encouraging in his first season, but huge dilemmas in how they get the offense to a point where they can become a serious contender again.
So, Rob, did you find it interesting during Mike Macdonald's last, press conference that he had? I believe it was Greg Bell asked him, when, because obviously they'd let Grubb go at that point, did you have a, hand in the hiring process? How involved were you in the hiring of Ryan Grubb? And he got really short and said, I was involved the entire time. it's interesting because I've heard things, behind the scenes and stuff like that, that those two just did not mesh. And it started before, we thought it was back, Ian from NS mentioned that they were going to potentially fire Grubb at the bye week and just move forward without him. Do you think like Mike Macdonald's kind of taking the blame on that one from John Schneider, and John Schneider actually had more to do with that? Because Corbin Smith made a comment on the Ian Furness show that Pete Carroll and John Schneider were looking at Ryan Grubb potentially after his first year if Pete had stayed on instead of going to Mike Macdonald.
No, I don't think there's any reason to sort of split hairs on who is most to blame for Ryan Grubb. I think it's pretty clear that when Mike Macdonald was appointed, there was not much time left to get an offensive coordinator, that there was a rush ongoing. And the candidates who were left, weren't a great list of options there. So they had to sort of go and quickly interview candidates. That was always going to be the most important appointment after you appoint a defensive-minded head coach. Reading what Brady Henderson had to say this weekend, it sounds as if Grubb said all the right things in that initial meeting, that Macdonald had some reservations about his ability to run the kind of offense that he wanted, and that Grubb said all of the right things. But then once the season got underway, Grubb was a bit stuck in his ways and wanted to do things how he thought was best. And they just philosophically weren't aligned. So it feels like ever since Grubb's gone, I've been a little bit confused by the debate that many people have had as to whether or not it was the right decision or not. It was the right decision because if the head coach can't work with the offensive coordinator, then it just isn't going to work. You're not going to persevere with that. So I don't blame anybody for this not working. I thought it was an intriguing hire. And who were the alternatives? Chip Kelly, Eric Bieniemy. Maybe they should have gone for Tanner Engstrom, but I've heard things that maybe Tanner Engstrom wasn't that interested in leaving Detroit, that maybe he thinks once Ben Johnson moves on, he'll be the offensive coordinator there, which would be an amazing job. So I think it was a difficult hire. They made it. It hasn't worked. Everybody moves on.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about the hire. Like at the beginning of the year, Bryce and I were both like, hey, cool. They're kind of going outside the box. They're taking a shot. This high flying offense, we looked at the receivers we had. Yeah, we get a guy in here like this. He'll unlock DK and JSN and all that stuff. So it was interesting. The thing I appreciate from Mike is that you kind of see that he knows what he wants, right? It's like it started almost with the linebackers, the two guys that John signed. He couldn't do it. You got to get them out. They're gone. Less than 24 hours after the Rams game, Ryan Grubb's out the door. So that sort of gives you a little more confidence with this head coach that he's not maybe loyal to certain guys, because I mean, there's really no loyalty there yet. Opposed to when Pete was here, you felt like maybe he promoted guys that shouldn't been in certain positions and hung on to those guys a little long. So that you kind of appreciate it. That's the one real positive that I like from Mike so far as how he's getting the players in the locker room to buy in. I mean, I think that's to be determined, but when you look at the candidates, we were talking off air, they've mentioned, three guys. What are your thoughts on sort of the three guys that have been mentioned? Clint Kubiak, Hank Fraley, the Lions offensive line coach. Intriguing in the sense that he had the best offensive line and the 1-2 punch it back. And then the Thomas Brown names seems like would be not a great one. Is just as early candidate names kind of thrown around, or you think there's some legitimacy to any of those names that could be here?
Well, they're going to get interviewed, so there's always an opportunity that they will impress sufficiently to get the job. But I think it's going to be a thorough search. I think that's what we're learning here. There's not. Part of me wondered a few weeks ago whether they just move Ryan Grubb on and have a bit of a, almost like a get this search out of the way and just appoint Jake Peets, but that's not going to happen by the sound of things. So they're now going to go and look around and see what's out there. And one of these three could get the job, but there's still a bunch of teams in the playoffs. So, if the Vikings lose, Broncos lose, whatever, Rams lose, they're going to be people that they want to go and speak to on those staffs. The Chiefs, and obviously the Lions the following week. When they're out, they're going to speak to other people. there's all sorts of things that could happen. So I think the hiring process is difficult because it's all dragged out now. I hope it doesn't take them a month to hire an offensive coordinator, but I kind of fear that it could do. And I think the biggest worry for me is there's no obvious candidate. There's not a home run hire. There's not even last year. I don't think there was an obvious replacement for Pete Carroll. There wasn't somebody who was like, get that guy now. I mean, that was probably Ben Johnson for me, but then it became clear that maybe he was not as appealing, maybe as you're just sort of looking at the results on the field, because you do have to be a leader of men as well as a great tactician. So that there's no great candidate, and that worries me a little bit because listen, people want the Seahawks to appoint someone who's going to be the offensive coordinator for the next 5 years and everything's hunky dory, and then they go on and become a head coach somewhere, and then you just get the next great offensive coordinator. I'm telling you now, we could be sat here in a year doing this again. Yeah. The Ravens went through under John Harbaugh offensive coordinators. I wrote an article today running through the list of coordinators that Harbaugh's had. They tend to last 2 years and then he fires them and they move on. So this could be a regular thing with Mike Macdonald. And if he hits on an offensive coordinator, they might get a head coaching job and we might be doing this again. Yeah. So I think that I'd get used to this. This could be a regular occurrence.
Yeah, and Rob, that's kind of, I remember you talked about it with Jeff Simmons and a bunch of other Seahawks content creators have about the problem with hiring a defensive head coach is you run this problem where you have to nail the OC hire, and then he's gone in 2 or 3 years if he does well, where if you do what, the Rams and some of these other teams have done, this 49ers, and you hire, the Vikings, you hire the offensive mastermind in a way, you're okay because he stays as your head coach unless you fire him theoretically or you trade him like the Raiders did with Tampa Bay with John Gruden. But yeah, it's kind of something I've kind of thought about is like, how often are we going to be going through this cycle of now we're looking for an OC and now we're looking for another OC? The one thing I hope about whoever they hire as the OC here in Seattle is they're able to put together a good staff and have real competency when it comes to building, developing offensive line play. That's the biggest thing for me, because no matter how many OCs we've had through Schottenheimer, Cable and Bevel were fine together until the NFL changed the rule on chopping down the field, which Cable's low lines were famous for in the zone scheme. But since then, we've kind of struggled with that offensive line. Andy Dickerson, Scott Huff. It just seems to be a revolving door, and our players don't seem to develop. And then when they potentially go off somewhere else, like a Mark Glowinski, and they look okay in another team potentially when they leave, it's something that's worrisome for me is our identifying of offensive lines. Is Steve Hutchinson really the guy for that job? Because that's part of the role he holds within the organization is IDing O linemen. And he's the guy that slammed his fist on the table for Stone Forsythe, and that hasn't exactly worked out fantastically.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot that needs to happen. I mean, first and foremost, you need somebody who can just operate the offense. You need somebody who can come in, who has a vision, who can install that vision, that it can be consistent. They've got to be details orientated. It has to be, I'm afraid to say, somebody who is willing to probably embrace 16-hour days, 17-hour days. It probably needs to be someone who is younger, or at least has got the bit between the teeth to go out there and be prepared to grind like crazy in order to get the details of an offense right, to find those little edges. I don't think it's any surprise that Kyle Shanahan looks like he's aged about 15 years in the last 5 years, because that's what it takes to be, I think, a top offensive play caller. It's details all of the time. So that's what I think first and foremost you need. You need somebody who can provide the vision, execute the vision, make all the fine details right. And yeah, as a franchise, it's not just with the offensive staff. They have to fix the offensive line. As I thought their first priority this offseason was to get a new offensive coordinator, and their second one was to fix the offensive line. So they have to do that. And I don't think you can just do it in the draft. I think there is going to have to be some free agency work there. Fixing the offensive line doesn't mean, oh, look, now we have the Dallas Cowboys 2014 line. It just means not being embarrassing, and it means being able to function. So it doesn't mean never giving up a sack either, or having to run the ball brilliantly every week. It just means being better. So that's a big task, and it's a huge job. And I think you have to think outside the box. I've written a couple of articles on this. That the best, who knew who Ben Johnson was 5 years ago?
Right.
Now he's the most coveted, dynamic, innovative offensive coordinator in the league. He was on Adam Gase's staff 5 years ago, and they ranked 31st in the NFL for offense. Then he went to work with Matt Patricia for a couple of years, and that was a disaster in Detroit. And it's only since Anthony Lynn got fired and he basically got told, right, you're play calling now, that he got the opportunity. So that next great offensive coordinator might be somebody who you bring up his name and everyone goes, are you kidding me? Who's this guy? I wanted someone from the Lions or the Chiefs or the Eagles or the Packers. The next great offensive coordinator might be sat on the Browns coaching staff right now. You've got to turn over every stone. And at least to me, it seems like the Seahawks are starting to do that with these three. I just hope there's three more names for us on Monday for further interviews that are lined up in the week.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to touch on the Pete's thing. Like you mentioned, Pete's. Do you think? I mean, not that he won't be in the mix, but is this more of a thorough search, you think, because of the zero play calling experience? And Mike, maybe even though he's been in the NFL for years and he's been from the McVay tree, Mike's maybe sitting back saying, look, I don't want a repeat of a guy with no NFL play calling experience. You think that because of just how bad it went? I mean, I know the alignment, that was obvious, but just how inexperienced Grubb seemed to be at the NFL level. Like it was, we've spoke about it all year. It was so head scratching game week to week that if you're Mike sitting back there and Pete's has been in the NFL, but you think that maybe plays a little more where, like you said, we all kind of thought maybe it would be a little quicker. Maybe it would just be Pete's. Do you think there's some merit to that?
The only reason I don't is because who's that candidate then? Like there's right. so few people out there with play calling experience. If you need a defensive coordinator right now, you can go and ring Robert Saleh, or you can ring Dennis Allen, or Lou Anarumo, or Jeff Ulbrich, or there's all sorts of guys you could go and ask to be your defensive coordinator who've been a head coach who's called a defense. On offense, those names just aren't there. And people have said Doug Peterson. I don't think Doug Peterson wants to be an offensive coordinator at his age for a 37, 38-year-old head coach. All of the talk in Jacksonville was that he has this right-hand man in Jacksonville who basically does everything, and that Peterson's kind of, do you know what? He just kind of does what he wants these days. He's not really that hands-on. Doesn't sound to me like somebody who's going to go and bust his ass as an offensive coordinator. Frank Reich's name gets mentioned. He's basically spoken about being retired, like not officially, because you can never, like someone rings you up and says, we're going to give you $10 million a year to do this. All of a sudden, you're not retired anymore. So I don't think he's actually felt the need to come out and go, I'm retired. but he pretty much has said that he is. And then you look at that and you're thinking, well, who else is there? Like if you appoint Thomas Brown, his play calling experience is limited to the time in Chicago. Yeah. If you point Hank Fraley, he's got no play calling experience at all. Albert Breer said he's having to find somebody who can help him with that, a passing game coordinator. Clint Kubiak's got a year. He's got a year of play calling experience. Like Jake Peetz has had a year at LSU, but it's college again. So this is the problem. Like I in an ideal world, you go and get somebody who has play called, who has got a bit of experience, who maybe just needs that second chance to really get after it. They just aren't there. And look at the game last night. Like I'm watching I'm looking on social media, and the Steelers fans are hammering Arthur Smith. And yet somebody like that he'd say, well, if he was available now, he'd say, well, he'd be worth a go. But look at the Steelers fans. Halfway through the season, they're saying, what a hire. Now they're saying, run him out of town. Yeah. There's just such a dearth of offensive play callers out there.
Yeah, no, there definitely is, Rob. And so with that being said, who are outside of the box for you, some of your potential, maybe not favorites, but guys you would be more than intrigued by if their name came up and it said, hey, the Seattle Seahawks are interviewing so and so. Can you give us a few guys that would pique your interest and make you think, hey, okay, maybe if he gets the right staff around him, maybe this could be something?
Yeah, I think Josh McCown would be very interesting. He's the guy that would probably get me the most excited, and that's not because I think he's a sure thing or anything like that. I just think he just seems to have that bit of something there. He's at a good age. He's worked with Kevin O'Connell. I don't know how you apportion, praise for the job with Sam Darnold, but he was Sam Darnold's quarterback coach. You listen to him; he's charismatic. He's sort of very, very intelligent. He's had a long NFL career with many different teams and schemes. So I think it would be interesting to see someone like that get a shot. Now, there is sort of, people have said to us, he's probably going to get a job somewhere else. So I don't know if that one's very likely to happen. And also, I'm not sure how attractive this job is, because if you come in as the offensive coordinator, your first question is going to be, well, who's my quarterback then? Is it Geno Smith? What's the plan at quarterback? What's your plan to fix the offensive line? Are you expecting me to do what the last two coordinators couldn't do with all of your weapons that you haven't been able to max out? It doesn't feel to me like I've got to get me to Seattle type of arrangement here. But then, some of these other teams who don't have any quarterbacks, if you're being told, hey, we're going to draft, so-and-so in this draft class, they might think, well, that's an even worse prospect, because how am I going to make them good? Because this isn't a very good quarterback draft. So, Josh McCown is someone that would interest me. There are some, I wrote an article today saying, if Hank Fraley got the job, I'd be semi-intrigued, because one, it's tapping into maybe some of the things that Detroit have done well, but also it's a statement of intent for the offensive line. It's a we are going to prioritize this now, and that would make me reassured that they're going to go after this in free agency in the draft. And the suggestion that I had, and people are going to hate this. They are going to hate this, because he's one of those guys who's, once your reputation goes, that's it. But I'd be interested in pairing him with someone like Ryan McAdoo, who everybody thinks is not the guy from the Giants with the daft suit and the hair and the sunglasses. Yeah, but the thing is I actually looked into his time. So in his first year as the head coach of the Giants, they went 11-5, and then in his second season, they went 2-10, and he was fired. At the start of the year, he had pretty much all of his team got injured. They had a massive issue off the field, which led to several players being suspended. It was basically thrown a hospital pass in that second season. And then once he benched Eli Manning, ending his 13-year run of consecutive starts, to start, of all people, Geno Smith, that was when the writing was on the wall. And he got fired in part because of the anger that emanated from the fan base around that decision. But Eli was finished. And he probably was right to put Geno Smith in, frankly, in terms of what's the best thing for the team. So from there, he goes to the Panthers, works as the coordinator under Matt Rule in 2022. And if people remember, it's very easy to forget the Panthers seem to have gone through so many regimes since then. When they fired Rule and gave Steve Wilkes the job, the Panthers for 6 games at the end of the year were the toughest team, the most physical team in the NFL. They ran the ball down your throat. They were running for 166 yards a game. They ran all that. They destroyed the Seahawks in Seattle. And Wilkes should have got the job. And McAdoo should have kept his job. If you take away, they played the Steelers in one of those final 6 games and ran for 21 yards because they were down early. It was like 14-0, 21-0. They were chasing the game. They weren't going to run the ball. And they had 21 yards in that game. If you take that game out, in the other 5 games, they were running for nearly 200 yards a game with McAdoo as offensive coordinator. And that's what the Seahawks claim to want. Then you look at what he's done for the last year. He's been working as a senior offensive assistant with the Patriots, working with their quarterbacks. Drake May has been hailing the guy. Joe Milton, who was terrible at Tennessee and looked really good in Week 18. He's been working very closely with him, specifically. He's praised him. The receivers have been praising him. Jacoby Brissett has been praising him. And he worked with 2 other offensive coaches as part of like a 3-headed monster in New England. So when I look at that, I think this guy's not trendy. he doesn't look he doesn't look like Sean McVay. He's not going to sort of parade around with a cracking haircut and biceps for days. But the guy has done what you claim to want to do. And although it might be a hard sell to make him the offensive coordinator, you pair him with Hank Fraley and say, could you guys work together on this? I don't think it's the worst idea in the world.
Yeah, no, it's I don't think they're going to get somebody potentially with play calling experience. If they do, I don't know if it'll be an inspiring hire. I think it'll be someone where like, okay, let's see where this goes, like a Clint Kubiak kind of individual, if he even wants to leave, if Aaron Glenn gets the job in New Orleans. One guy, that's kind of, Aaron Stenovich, who's the Green Bay Packers OC currently. He doesn't have play calling duties in Green Bay, but he, I think, is an interesting candidate potentially. The one I've been throwing around, the one I've kind of done a lot of research in, I don't know if a lot of people have or are interested in, is Marcus Brady. He's been a prior OC before in 2 different leagues. He's been on the Philadelphia Eagles when they had their small Super Bowl appearance a few years ago. And, he's someone that Jim Harbaugh wanted to hire because of Mark Trestman, who is on Jim Harbaugh's staff there in LA. And I know the offense didn't look good yesterday. But the one thing that stood out to me from Mike Macdonald's press conference at the year end was how much he loves Jim Harbaugh's version of offense. And that's where I think you're going to see him tap into that, whether that's someone that Jim or John has previously, had connections with. And so for me, I'd be very interested if Marcus Brady got an interview to see where's the potential option there. But yeah, Hank Fraley's interesting if they compare him with someone. T. Martin's someone I've heard a lot of people throw names around as well. But I don't know why if he was a guy that, Mike Macdonald was interested in, why he didn't bring him from Baltimore initially.
Yeah.
That's, kind of the interesting factor in all this. Like, I would be extremely excited if Josh McCown got one. The other guy I'd be interested in too is Mark Brunell, who's the quarterback coach in Detroit. We talk about ex-quarterbacks and potentially having an opportunity. And the other guy that I know is, I think, got an interview for, I don't know if it was Cleveland's job, is Brian Greasy, who's the quarterback coach down in San Francisco.
Yeah, I think that those two guys, the problem is they don't seem to have really had much of a coaching pathway until they sort of took jobs that they kind of fancied. And I don't know if for example, Greasy and Brunel are thinking, right, I want to grind. Like, do I want to go and be the Seahawks offensive coordinator? Brady's an interesting one, as you mentioned there, because of the Harbaugh tree. I mean, it's a 1-year tree, but he has worked there, so it would be interesting if he got an interview. It'd be quite easy to imagine that he could be on the list next week. Now that the Chargers season is over, with Stenovich and other people have talked about Mike LaFleur and people like that. The only thing is I don't really understand why the Packers would allow him to speak to the Seahawks. Like I know he's not calling plays, but they don't have to agree to it, and I don't know if that would be very likely, or if he would think if he is getting connected to jobs now, he may well think I've got a good thing going here. Like I will get maybe a head coaching offer down the line, connecting myself to Matt LaFleur, as opposed to going to Seattle to run Seattle's offense. And I'm a bit suspicious just because Nathaniel Hackett was so highly rated, and then he bombed as soon as he didn't have Matt LaFleur by his side twice. Yeah. And I think LaFleur is the real deal. Like, he is a top coach. So when you have a top coach and then you have somebody alongside him who doesn't call the plays, I really struggle to get that excited about appointing the guy who maybe his reputation is being enhanced because he's next to LaFleur. I really want to find the guy who is not having that sort of association reputation boost. I want to find someone who's the next top coordinator, or somebody who we're overlooking, which is why I came up with Ben McAdoo, because he is the opposite of trendy. His appointment would go down in the same way that it had been announced they're bringing back Shane Waldron or Darrell Bevel. Probably it will be a big old collective sigh from the fan base. But the last time he called plays, the Panthers ran it down everybody's throats. And if you want to do that, he's got head coaching experience. He's got play calling experience. He worked with John Schneider in Green Bay. He's won a Super Bowl. He's been on a staff that's won a Super Bowl in Green Bay with Mike McCarthy. I just think that is the kind of person that I think makes some sense to have a conversation with. Certainly, I'd prefer that than someone like Chip Kelly, who, I don't know if you guys watched the Ohio State game the other day, managed to somehow take the freakiest, most unbelievable athlete in the whole of college football, and in the biggest game of the season, manufacture one catch for 3 yards.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's going to be an interesting search. Like you said, it'll be interesting to see when they find their guy. Do they just keep going and pushing this, or do they get this settled out of the way? Because I mean, there's other things, man. I mean, like, let's kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about.
Can I just say one last thing?
Oh yeah.
Can I just say, because I just want to read out the John Harbaugh offensive coordinators, because this is where Mike Macdonald's come from.
Right.
So this might just set expectations a little bit. Cam Cameron was the coordinator for 4 years. Gary Kubiak for 1 year. Mark Trestman for 2 years. Marty Mornhinweg for 2 years. Greg Roman for 3 years. And then Todd Monken. None of these names are trendy names, with maybe an exception of Kubiak, who at the time I don't think was that trendy. So, and it was before he won a Super Bowl. So I just think we need to sort of look at this and think the history of Baltimore is not to go and get cool, trendy coordinator. It's to get someone who clearly Harbaugh thought, this guy can do what I want. And maybe that's what Macdonald's going to do.
Yeah. I mean, what would you want to see in here? Like, if it was just like, you're Mike, the defensive head coach, would you prefer a guy that just like has some NFL experience, maybe a little bit of play calling, or just that just is going to align with him, and then we'll see how it goes? Like, it just was so obvious this year, right? Just the lack of running the ball, the predictability. I feel like it just couldn't get any worse than what we saw. What do you want to see out of the next OC, really?
Identity.
Right.
I want to have an idea as to what the Seahawks are. When you watch the Lions, what do you expect? Aggression, physical play up front, keeping you on your toes all the time. When they get in the red zone, they're going to have worked on something all week. And it's just in the back pocket. If we get this kind of a look, we're going to go to that play that we've not shown on tape all year, and we're going to go to it. What are the Niners under Shanahan? You know what the Shanahan offense is. It's very, very clever running, manufactured running, irrespective of who the running back is. The passing game is very much, the quarterbacks don't have to be unbelievable. It really is just, if you see this, do this. If you see that, do this. Everyone can understand what the Shanahan system is. McVay has kind of adapted and adjusted his thing. I think he's a genius, though, so it's quite hard to emulate that. And then with the Eagles, it's let's get as many explosive players as we can and run the heck out of it and throw the ball downfield. So I want to know what the Seahawks are. And once you've established, you need somebody who can come into the room and go, this is what we're going to be. This is how I'm going to do it. This is how hard I'm going to work and the time I'm going to put into this, because I want to get to here in my career. I'm not just coming here for a payday. I'm desperate to get to the top, and I will work every day for the time that I'm here with the intention of becoming a head coach myself as soon as possible. And I think once you've got that, it's then right. Okay, we're going to hire you. What do you need to make this a success?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you need some offensive linemen, and you need a plan beyond this year-to-year thing that's going on, which is probably going to continue at quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, like let's touch on that. Just segueing into that, man. We could segue into either one, but the quarterback situation has been a topic for a long time. Bryce, have I talked about even since the Russell Wilson trade, feels like fast forward to where we are now, felt like there should have been some different answer at QB. Now, if you look back at the prior drafts where we were sitting, maybe it wasn't John's fault, even when we had the number 5 pick, the rumors of Anthony Richardson, then he goes to 4. Last year, the 6 guys. I mean, look, that's what happens when you're middling, right? You don't have that chance to get the QB. What are we doing here? Because you're hearing more talk now from amongst fans, like, there is that group of Geno supporters. No matter what happens, it's not his fault, right? Or like, let's dissect every single interception, and no, maybe only one of them was Geno, right? And it just gets tiring. It for me, anyways. And I look at it like, now you're sitting here with no real succession plan. You're 3 years into Geno Smith, and now you're sitting here. What do we do? The options are, do you outright cut him? Do you sign him for the next 2 years? How are you looking at it? What would you like to see? Because obviously he's going to be a substantial cap hit. And I guess, Bryce and I had a conversation. If you did part ways, it forces your hand to, get involved in the draft right now, whether that's a day 2 pick, whatever. And then you sign whatever they say, a Kirk Cousins for a filler. How are you seeing the quarterback situation go down this offseason, and sort of what would you like to see happen in the near future, and then kind of just moving forward?
Before I answer that, let me just say that I think that the discourse around Geno Smith is making it less enjoyable to be a Seahawks fan.
Yeah.
That I don't think people realize this, and probably they don't care. But the way people react, the people who are very, very supportive of Geno Smith, acting like anybody who doesn't share their opinion that he's, I don't know, a franchise quarterback or worthy of a huge contract, that everybody who doesn't share that opinion is stupid or doesn't understand football.
Right.
It makes it very unpleasant to follow along. And then you have the other side of it, which is he throws an interception, and then you have the people saying he's absolutely useless. He needs to be cut first thing in the morning. They are two cheeks of the same arse, in my opinion. And what you end up having is this. There's been genuinely games where I've watched this season where I've thought to myself, I'm not enjoying this win as much as I will, because I know what's going to happen. We're going to have a week of people crowing about Geno's had a good game. Therefore, all of you people, you stupid people who don't agree with me, are wrong. Now we've just had the latest example of this. So you just need to get on board. And then the following week, when he has a 3 interception game against the Rams and plays a contributing factor to that, we have the other side then saying he's awful. We've got to get rid of him. And now they've got to do this. And John Schneider's no good because he should have drafted someone last year. But who? I don't know. But he should have drafted someone anyway. And then you have the other side going, what are you talking about? Geno Smith's great because I've pulled up this one graph that I've managed to find that says that he's 7th in the league in something. And the whole of that contributes to just making this so bloody painful all of the time. And I'm so bored of it. It feels to me like there are people who exist, not just in this fan base, but across the NFL now. They're no longer fans of teams. They're fans of players, of individuals. I think there are people out there, you have some of them on your show, who are no longer Seahawks fans. They're Geno Smith fans.
Yeah.
They annoy the hell out of me. I want the Seahawks to win. It used to be a time where you would root for the Seahawks. I don't care about the quarterback as much. I just want to win. Yeah. And people just obsess now about their favorite players, their favorite quarterbacks. We saw it with Justin Herbert yesterday. The people who decided that he's awful now had their moment in the sun yesterday and today.
Yep.
And I think Justin Herbert's not horrible. He just had a really bad game. That can happen. It's happened to Peyton Manning. He can have a bad game. So I'm just bored of all that discourse. It really does make it less enjoyable to be a Seahawks fan. And I've had enough of it. It started with Russ, and now it's carried on to Geno. And I find it really, really tiresome. Sorry to go off on one there. That's my prevailing thought of the franchise right now. I find it really, really irritating. And I'm sick of going to war and everything, whether it's Geno Smith, whether Russell Wilson's going to be traded, whether running backs matter. That was one thing we all argued about 5 or 6 years ago. It's so stupid. Just follow the team. Anyway, what do I want to see happen? I am completely resigned to just having to just endure whatever happens. I have no real opinion either way, because I want the Seahawks to have a young, brilliant franchise quarterback, a Jaden Daniels, let's say. But I look at the draft. I've watched all of these quarterbacks over and over again, and I'm not suggesting that one won't break through and be really good, that the Seahawks might be able to draft. But I can only give you my opinion right now, I'm looking at this class and I don't see the solution. And I look at the next year's class and I think, I'm not sure I can see the solution there either. Maybe there's like a couple but there's also a lot of overrated quarterbacks who are eligible for 2026. So I'm starting to think, I don't really know how you get out of this. And then you remind yourself, there's only about 5-6 quarterbacks that, are the cast iron. If the head coach is asked if they're back next year, they laugh in your face, which obviously Mike Macdonald didn't do. But if you asked Zach Taylor, is Joe Burrow your quarterback next year? He'd go, are you insane asking me that? Like, you want a quarterback who's like, that would be the response if you ask that question. And they are so few and far between. And I don't know how you find that guy. And the Seahawks looked out with Russell Wilson. It was bleak before they drafted Wilson. It was like, oh my God, how are they going to, they're not going to get Luck. They're not going to get Robert Griffin III. They can't even get Ryan Tannehill in this draft. Who are they going to get? Oh, well, they've got Russell Wilson in round 3. Amazing. Everything's fine for the next decade. Right now, they're back in that place where it's really hard to know how they're going to solve this. So with Geno, I guess as long as he's not too expensive, you carry on. There's no point sort of getting worse at the position for the sake of it. The problem is, I think, at the minute, guys, and I'll wrap up this long-winded opinion in a second, is that all of the talk this week has been very negative from the informed people in the media. That all of the people who you would listen to or connected, who you should listen to, are saying things like, could go either way, this, not sure. And the tone's changed. And that makes me think that Geno and his representatives are being quite full on here and going, we want commitment and we want term. We don't want to go year to year, and we absolutely are not doing a team-friendly deal. And the Seahawks are not going to cave to that at all. They will move on. If they're saying we want 40, 50 million a year with guarantees for like the next 3 years, locking this guy down as the starter, I don't think that's going to happen. So it's whether or not Geno's people are going to be willing to compromise over the next 2 months. It might just be brinkmanship at the minute. There's a long way to go in this process until free agency starts. So there's a lot of water to go under the bridge. But I get the sense right now that Geno's people have been so aggressive that the Seahawks, in their mind at least, are thinking unless this changes, they might have to move on. So we'll see what happens.
It's really interesting, Rob, because I don't know if you heard, I think Mike Salk and Brock Hewitt had Matt Hasselbeck on their show this past week. And they asked him, they said, you're kind of going, we're in the same situation Geno was. You were 34, coming off a bit of an injury-riddled season, Pete's first year. Jeremy Bates was the OC. He got fired. What were those discussions? Because you ended up in Nashville playing for the Titans. And he said, I basically walked into a meeting with John and Pete, and they said, hey, look, we're going in a different direction with the quarterback position because we're going in a different direction with the OC, and it's the only time we can make this a clean cut. And they went in that direction. Now, that team wasn't, to the point I think where John and Mike Macdonald think they are towards contending. That team still realized they needed to do a couple of things. But, you listen, like you said, to a lot of the people that are connected, it sounds like it's gotten more 50-50. More they think that, they could move on from Geno. And the other thing for me about it that's interesting is the new OC may not be interested in Geno. He may be able to pull a guy with him from wherever he comes. And that's something that potentially could be in this play. Because I don't know if it's Sam Howell. There's a bunch of people that love Sam Howell. I don't think Sam Howell's the right opportunity. And like you said, the draft class this year, you're not drafting any of these guys to plug and play year one. Like, they're not ready to plug and play guys. Like, if you get a Jackson Dart or Will Howard or Kyle McCord, or, even if you went and took Jalen Milroe for whatever reason, they need to sit a few years before you can actually put them out there and see what they've got. They may be an upgrade over a potential Sam Howell because they may have more athletic upside or just potential in that regard, but they're not ready to go out and start. And so I think it's going to be very interesting to see. I think the OC hire is going to play a bigger part in the Geno discussion than maybe we initially thought, even though Mike Macdonald came out and said, he thinks Geno's the right guy right now. That OC may come in and say, hey, I want something else. I don't want to run it back with Geno Smith for another year.
I think you're absolutely right, because if you hire Hank Fraley, I think it's very difficult to say to him, hey, Hank, you're a defensive line coach until this year. Now we want you to develop a rookie quarterback. or now we want you to take on a reclamation project at QB. He's much more likely to want to say, oh, just give me the guy who started the last 3 years and we'll crack on. But if you hire Josh McCown, who's just done what he did with Sam Darnold and has just spent the last few weeks working with Daniel Jones as well, and you think, well, maybe he signs Jones, maybe they sign Darnold, or maybe they take on a Trey Lance. I don't know, like some, do you know what I mean? Like John went to Trey Lance's pro day, so maybe they just go that route. There's all sorts of ways they could go based on who is the offensive coordinator. I think it's very much in the could go either way category. I think what probably needs to happen is and I wouldn't be surprised if this happened, is if the Seahawks say to Geno Smith, we're giving you permission to see what's out there. And they let his representative, maybe at the combine, go and talk about trade interest, contract interest, if he is traded, and to see what's out there, because that helps establish his market. And the Seahawks need that info. When they signed him in 2023, he was a free agent, so he could go and establish his market, and then they found a compromise. At the minute, until he's got the permission to go and speak to the teams, the Seahawks are only bidding against themselves. That's a really difficult place to be. So they need to allow Geno to go and speak to other teams. The problem is he may go, well, we don't want to. We're not going to do that. We're not going to make your job easier for you. Make a call. Are you signing us or not? And if you're not, then you have to release us so that we can go and be a free agent. Now, this is where it gets very difficult for the Seahawks here. And look, I could imagine a compromise down the line. I think it's within Geno's interest to come to the team a little bit, because I don't think he'll get as good an opportunity elsewhere. I could imagine him being cut because they're just too far apart. I could imagine Pete Carroll getting the Raiders job and saying, I don't want any of these rookie quarterbacks. I don't want Shedeur Sanders. Like Pete and Shedeur would be, I don't know. I don't know if that'd be fun or not. But he may say, we'll give you a day 2 pick for Geno Smith, and we'll sign you Geno with our massive amount of cap space for the next 3 years, and we'll start our bridge to the future with you. And then you might think, well, that's a good deal. So there's all sorts of things on the table. I do think the Seahawks will be prepared to move on if needed, but I still think there is a chance of a compromise. The one thing I don't think is Geno Smith is not going to get paid an absolute fortune with guarantees and commitment for, like, let's say 3 years. And I don't think he's going to be back on a $44.5 million cap hit.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I guess too, it's just, there's so many intangibles to this too, right? Like new OC, Mike's first year, he wins 10 games. I guess it comes down to two, like, and we've sort of been misdiagnosed before about how close this team is to competing. Like if Mike and John are sitting in an office and say, look, we are just a few tweaks away at that offensive line and we can get to 12 wins, 13 wins. We should have won and beat Minnesota. We should have won that. You could talk yourself into it, right? And then maybe you do overpay Geno a little bit. Like it's one of those things where Mike's thinking, I don't think they will, but where do you stand on where the Seahawks think they are as far as how close they feel they are to, where it's easier for us we got a hard line here. If you guys don't want it, fine, we'll release you and we'll move forward because we don't think we're there. Like we think we're at least a couple of years and we're okay. Maybe even if we have to take a step back and put you in a better position for that following draft. Or do you think they're thinking, hey, we're just some tweaks? And the scary thing about that too is we could touch on the offensive line is how John approaches that again. And because we all can sit here and have our wish list with, well, let's go out and make a big splash and get at least one guard just below Pro Bowl level and hit the draft. But we've seen John do John things before, and how realistic is that? So that all has to play together, really, how close they think. Where do you think they stand on that? Is how close they think they are to contending as a franchise here?
I think they think they're close, and to be honest, I suppose that you could look at it two ways. On the one hand, any serious team that they played in 2024, it was bad. But if they, and this is one of the reasons why Ryan Grubb's gone, by the way, is they play like crap in the first half against the Giants, and it's 10-10, against the Giants. And you're thinking, okay, crap first half, you just sort of readjust, and then you do what you need to do in the second half, and you win the game. And they didn't. Ryan Grubb got it all wrong, and they lost. But if you win that game, you're now 11-win team.
Yeah.
And if you handle your business against the Rams at home or the Vikings at home, you're then a 12-win team. And actually, when if you say, how close are you? If you're a 12-win team, you're pretty close because you've got 12 wins. 12 wins is 12 wins, isn't it? So I don't think they will view it as we need to take a big step back here and make sweeping changes or have a bad season to come back. I think they think they're probably somewhat close, whilst I also don't think John Schneider is in any way, shape, or form committed to Geno Smith, because I think Mike Macdonald is. I don't think John Schneider is. And I think Schneider will feel like we found Russell Wilson in round 3. We found Geno Smith, as a free agent. We can do it again. And we would, I suppose, see whether he's right or wrong. I mean, I do think there is something to be said for if you have a very clear identity and you stick to it and you can execute it and you are a details-orientated team, that quarterbacks can fit in more than maybe people realize. Like, look at Shanahan. He does it every year because he's such a frigging detailed-orientated, fine-tuned offense. So I think if you can create that, you can plug a quarterback in. And not anybody, but there are some quarterbacks who could maybe run the system. And as Geno Smith has amazing moments. Like, there are some great throws from Geno that very few people can make. And you couldn't just chuck any old quarterback in there and expect them to do that. But he was also very, very average or in the bottom half on a lot of important categories as well. And he had a lot of interceptions and he had a lot of things like that. So I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility of saying you could get somebody for $5 to $10 million who can do what Geno can do for 44.5. So and actually maybe going in that route might help you get to the 11, 12 wins instead of 9, 10, because you've suddenly got a lot more money to spend on your offensive line and your defense, which I think is something they have to continue. I want to say trenches. Like, we talk a lot about Geno Smith, and I get it, and I understand why, and quarterbacks, and we can spend time talking about the quarterbacks in the draft if you want to, but trenches. Fix the trenches. O-line, D-line. If you can win the trenches, you'll win more games than you're not. You'll be a playoff threat. That's what they've got to do. Keep adding to the D-line. Have a good O-line for the first time in 20 years. If they can do that, they'll be a really good football team. It's not rocket science.
So kind of pivoting, Rob, to the offseason a little bit more, who are some potential cap casualties, guys you think won't be on this roster that we'll see get cut to make cap space, because everyone's freaking out about Seattle's cap space, but there are some levers they can pull. I've spoken with someone that very well, Curtis Allen, about, and he said there's easy ways for them to make cap space, and that's without touching Geno or DK's. So, who are some guys you don't expect to be on this roster come, the draft or even training camp?
Yeah, I mean, I will just say, because I see this mentioned a lot, and Curtis, I think, would agree with me on this, is that people keep referencing the fact that the Seahawks have $147 million in 2026 and $248 million in 2027. What I would say is that at the moment, the Seahawks have 11 players contracted for 2027, and they have 25 contracted for 2026. So, you're talking about signing 50 players here. Like, that cap space is going to come down. You've got a whole bunch of players who are going to want second contracts, or they're going to need to be replaced very soon. Like, there's a large chunk of your roster that is coming to the end of its contract. So that cap space will come down quite rapidly. And then for next year, there are ways that you can create cap space. Tyler Lockett's not going to be on the roster next year. They will save $17 million on him. I don't really understand how at the end of his contract, you are still eating $14 million in dead money. The Seahawks have been terrible at structuring their contracts for years. The thought that you would be having to pay $14 million of your cap hit next year just to not have Tyler Lockett on the roster is appalling. use of money and cap space. So, but they will save 17 million there. They will need to create about that again to get into the black. So I would imagine that Draymond Jones will go. That will save $11.6 million. And I would be very surprised if they don't cut Roy Robertson Harris, given how his snaps came down, to save 6.6 million. He could always come back just at a much lower cap hit than that. So those would be the immediate ones to get you into the black. The only way, though, like that gets you, that's just to be able to actually spend anything. If you want to actually do things in free agency, the two players that you have to look at are Geno Smith and DK Metcalf. They are going to sign. I'm telling you now, guys, they are going to sign DK Metcalf to a new contract. Yeah. It's not even a conversation. It's not. Like, people keep thinking, they're going to trade him, they're going to do this. Listen, I'm not saying it's the right thing at all. I'm just saying it's what's going to happen. Because if you trade or cut DK Metcalf this year, it's going to cost you $21 million. Again, the structure is not good. You will only save $10.9 million. It is not going to be worth, like, you are not going to get like a top 15 pick or whatever to justify eating $21 million of cap space on DK Metcalf. The way to save money on DK Metcalf is to extend him, because if you extend his contract, you can reduce his cap hit from 32 million to about 15. Right. You can wipe half of his cap hit off the books by extending him. So that's how they're going to save money. That's how they're going to go. The cuts that I mentioned, and maybe Noah Fant will be one of those ones as well. That's how they get into the black. The way that they create money to spend is by extended DK Metcalf. But then this is why they need to get Geno's cap hit off or down as well, because that's only like 15 million, 16 million to spend, maybe 20 max in total. If you want to go and get a good offensive lineman, bang, that's gone in one fell swoop with one signing. So they then have to lower Geno's cap hit, either with an extension or by moving on to save, $31 million. So that's how they're going to do it. Yes, they can create money, but it's, there's a fair bit of work to do here. And they still have to replace those players that they're cutting, by the way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What you want to get into some Q&As, Bryce?
Yeah, let's get into some Q&As here, because I think they'll lead us into some draft conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Pop the first one up for Rob here. My Seahawks, Martin Lawrence. My Seahawks offensive priorities: improve the O-line, running back used more and correctly in disguise or misdirection on at least some plays. I mean, Rob, that was kind of the thing, number 3 there, where we thought Ryan Grubb was going to bring like all this pre-snap motion. DK is going to have the biggest year of his career. And I think really when you sit there and what you saw, it was just so predictable that now people are like, look, just get me some type of, unpredictability, just average. I mean, pretty spot on. What about the running back thing? Touch on the running backs real quick. How do we didn't touch on K9 or anything. What do you think there about using him, even style wise? What do you think moving forward the Hawks want to do, say, with a guy like K9 as well?
Well, I think they probably still believe in him, and he's very talented. I think the problem is that Zach Charbonnet is better suited to being a lead back. He is not a change of pace back. And when he starts, he plays at this level. And when he comes into the game, he plays at this level. So he needs to start. And then with Walker, maybe he's better to be like the change of pace, maybe. I don't know. Maybe they can get somebody in who can actually establish a proper 1-2 punch, because they've had these guys for 2 years together and they haven't been able to do it. And maybe if you appoint someone like Hank Fraley, you can go, yeah, here's how we did it in Detroit, because they do use 2 backs very, very effectively. But one is extremely quick and dynamic and the other's a power back. Like, is there a way of sort of establishing that kind of dynamic in Seattle? You need somebody who is committed to the run, who has good ideas in the running game. Yes, they need the misdirection. They need to use play action more. They need to combine the play passes with the running in order to be effective in that way. But it does also, I mean, he says it there, number 1, improve the offensive line. That's the be all and end all. Whoever the quarterback is, whoever the personnel is, they cannot be going into free agency 3 weeks in. Okay, who's left at left guard? Well, Laken Tomlinson. We'll sign him for $1 million. Oh, yes, the centers aren't very good, are they? Let's sign someone in August. Look, well, it doesn't matter that Abe Lucas isn't healthy. We'll just sign George Fant again. No, it needs to be a better plan than that. And it starts with probably spending more money than they ever have on an offensive lineman in free agency and going that route and taking a risk. No one thinks it's a guarantee, but there'll be less criticism of John Schneider if they just go and spend some money on an offensive lineman. And then it means focusing on the draft. Like, people are talking about all sorts of different positions at the minute about the draft. It's almost as if people are trying too hard to not draft an offensive lineman in their conversations about the draft at the minute. It's like, guys, it's obvious. It's there. It's as obvious as the sky is blue. Draft some offensive linemen. Draft some defensive linemen. That's what this draft's all about.
Yeah, no, with the improve the O-line, you can't do exactly what you said, Rob. You can't wait and bargain shop. They've done that for practically all of John Schneider's entirety of his tenure here as GM, as they bargain shopped in a lot of ways. Luke Jokel, Jamarcus Webb, just to name a few of those guys. If they don't address this properly, I think in this offseason with, if they, I'm not going to be upset if I wake up the morning of free agency and it says Seahawks have signed Trey Smith. I'm not going to be mad at that. If they don't do anything else for the rest of free agency.
Right. I will also not be mad if I wake up and find out I've won the lottery that day.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But if that is like their big move of free agency, is they go out and get a bona fide guard to put on this O-line, and then you start adding pieces, like you said, through the draft at other positions, at least you've gone and changed the direction of how you've dealt with free agency. You've actually gone and tried to address something with a better player. Or if you can't get Trey Smith, at least get 2 above average guards. Like, you have the tackles currently, but like, if that's what Seattle were to do, and I wake up and I see that, I freaking would jump on here and do a podcast for 2 hours about how they finally figured out how to fix, to address the offensive line correctly, rather than just, hey, let's go, like you said, go get Laken Tomlinson. No one knows that he's actually going to be good. We're going to keep that hush-hush that he's actually going to pan out, and it never does.
If Trey Smith reaches free agency, I'd be all in on resetting the guard market. Like, no problem at all. No issue at all with that. And if it doesn't work out, so what? Like, do you know what? Of all the things, like, people made excuses about Jamal Adams' the trade and the contract for years. Oh, Quandre Diggs is actually good. He's worth $20 million a year. Like, come on. Like, no one would be criticizing John Schneider for paying Trey Smith, let's say, $25 million a year. Like, just go and do it, man. Just go and do it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Oh, well, God loves a trier. Like, you just give it a go, right? And then if he's not available, I'm with you. Like, go on, I don't know, get Mekhi Becton, whatever, an ascending player, or Daniels from the Steelers if he's back to health, or go and get Ryan Kelly, or, if the Chiefs do sign Trey Smith, give him a ring and say, what about Joe Tooney? You can't afford all these guys. What's he going to take? Like, just do something. Like, do something. Find a way to improve your offensive line. And then once you've done that, with hopefully a couple of good veterans, go again in the draft. Go and get a good guard or a good center in the draft, or both. Like, look at the Eagles. Eagles have all these guys, and they're always like 2-3 years planning ahead. We'll go and get this, Landon Dickerson. We don't need him, but we'll have him anyway. Oh, look, he's like starting and beating people up in the trenches. Hey, we're going to watch him in the playoffs again this year. Oh, look, Cam Jurgens, the player that I love both of those guys. But Jason Kelsey's here. But we'll draft Jurgens anyway, because we'll just develop him for the future. Who in Philadelphia is going, what a waste of pick? They're not quibbling over whether they should have taken D. Eskridge or not in Philadelphia. Like, they've gone and they've done what they needed to do. That's what the Seahawks need to do. If you go and sign a veteran guard and a center, and then you draft a guard and a center, no one's going to give a flying F. Like, just go and do it. Like, do it. Just go on and commit to the offensive line. And now I look at the draft board here. All I see are offensive linemen, defensive linemen. You can get a receiver on day 3. You can get a tight end in day 2 or 3. What are we doing? Like, we've been a finesse team for years. We've spent years complaining about the team not taking Creed Humphrey or not taking this offensive lineman, not taking that offensive lineman. And now we're talking about doing other positions when there's a draft full of offensive linemen available. Go and draft an offensive lineman.
Yeah.
What are we doing?
I mean, you talk about philosophy in Philly and maybe, I mean, that's the one thing you see, like we mentioned early in the show, how Mike didn't waste any time getting rid of Grubb, so obviously, he cares. People think, well, he's the head coach. He cares about both sides of the ball and the whole identity of your team, which is, I think if Pete was still here, I think we'd have some reservations. They're probably going to do the same thing. But I think, and what your thoughts are, it feels like Mike and John are going to be working together pretty heavily in this offseason. So does that give you a little more confidence that you might see John change his ways a bit? Like, okay, I'm going to make that big splash, maybe not the guy we're hoping for, but just, definitely above a Laken Tomlinson, and feel like not wait until everyone else has made a splash and then be like, okay, let's, pick up the pieces. And like you mentioned, again, the guy who blew at his ACL, and maybe this will all come together kind of thing. You think Mike's going in there and thinking, look, we got to have a different approach here?
I'm not confident about that because John Schneider's been here for 15 years.
Yeah.
And I think there is part of him that thinks, well, I could spend 20 million on a guard, or I could spend 15 million on 3. And that's how they end up with BJ Finney and Cedric Agbury and Brandon Shell, and then saying they're the 3 that they wanted all along. So, no, I am not confident about that. There is part of me that is a little bit worried if we get to a situation where they're in the draft, a good player falls to them at a different position, and they stick to the board, because that's been a big thing for them. Not reaching on players, sticking to the board all the time. I'm a little bit more confident that the board's going to align with the need in this draft, I have to say. And you can manufacture things a little bit to make it so even more if you want to trade down. But there is always that chance that, oh no, one of these receivers has fallen to 18 and the Seahawks have taken them. And you're thinking, I thought we wanted to be a physical team, guys. I thought we wanted to run the football. Oh, and you've drafted another receiver. Like, no. Like, just watch the Bills playing. I don't know if you've seen some of that. Like, they don't have a first-round receiver. They have Khalil Shakir running around everywhere, and he's the 5th-round pick. But he was fast and explosive. Like, just go and get someone like that. Like, when the Seahawks were really good, they had Doug Baldwin and, undrafted free agent. I'm not saying, it's very easy to say, just get the great undrafted free agent receiver, who's going to be a Ring of Honor player. Now, it's obviously it's very hard. But you've already spent a top 20 pick on a receiver. You've already spent a 2nd-round pick and a contract on DK Metcalf. Let's go and get some linemen. John. Let's just go and do that.
Yeah, it would be nice if that's kind of the way it ends up going for the Seahawks. They're actually able to go get some linemen. So speaking of linemen, everyone in our chat's talking about it. I'm going to bring it up right now. Dogzilla's in here. Staton, like Alabama left guard Booker.
You can call me Rob. It's fine. Yes, I do like Booker. I think he is. I want a big offensive line. I want a big physical offensive line. I don't want these smaller finesse offensive linemen who don't finish. I want some beast. I want some bastards in the line. I want some people who are going to get in there and smack people around, move people off the line. That's what Booker does. He gets in, he finishes plays. And people go, oh yeah, well, he's big. You sometimes you look at a lineman and they're sloppy big. Tyler Booker's big and in proportion. He's a 5-star recruit. Like, everything's in proportion. There's not loads of bad weight on that guy. You get some very sloppy frames with these guys who are over 300 pounds. He doesn't have a sloppy frame. He's big. He's physical. He's the one who's in the huddle firing everybody up before the game. He can get out on the move. Now, is he going to fly on a pull, get 25 yards downfield ahead of your running back, and latch onto a 200-pound safety? He's probably not. I'm not worried about that because what he's going to do is he's going to hit the guy in the face who's in front of him. So I'm up for Tyler Booker. I'm all in on that. He's not the only one, but I want a big offensive line. If you want, like, Trey Smith ran a 4.82 short shuttle. He's not an amazing athlete. He's not got great agility, but he's 320 pounds and he hits you in the face. So if you could get Trey Smith on the right guard and put Tyler Booker at left guard, hey, that sounds like a plan, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Rob, who are just everybody listening? Who are a few other guys that you'd like to see that you're high on this draft on the O-line that are coming out this year?
Well, it's funny. I was actually looking at the statistics for a lot of these players yesterday. I mean, the players that I can tell you the players I like in terms of grade, and then I can maybe give you some of these statistics. So I think if Kelvin Banks lasts at 18, I think he's got a bit of an Elijah Vera Tucker to him, a player that I really liked when he was in the draft, and injuries have kind of stopped him being a top guard. But I think Banks has got that kind of potential. I think Josh Connolly has to be a guard. I think he has to kick inside because of his size. Teams might try him out there, but I think eventually they'll push him inside. But he's very aggressive, very athletic. I like the way he plays. I love his attitude. Like, he is a hit you in the face kind of guy. I think Donovan Jackson was back on form at left guard before they had to kick him out to left tackle for Ohio State. So I like those four guys. A big Gray Zabel fan, smaller school, day two kind of guy who can kick inside. I'm very interested in Armand Membu, who's played tackle for Missouri, but I think he's better at guard, could be very, very good. The more I watched a bit of him last week and pumped him up around because I really like what I saw on that sort of extended tape study. You've got Dylan Fairchild at Georgia. I think that's going to be a little bit stronger. But I do like this size, great wrestling background. It's kind of he looks the part of an NFL guard. I think Jonas Savaiinaea is very, very interesting in terms of somebody who could play right guard. I don't like him at right tackle. He doesn't finish enough for me. He doesn't hit anybody. Like he holds position. He reminds me a bit of Ethan Posick in that he never finished. He just kind of stood in the way. And that's what Savaiinaea does. It's like, finish someone, stick someone on the turf, man. Like, get a personal foul every now and again. Like, come on. Like, it's just, let's see some attitude. I expected to see that from him and didn't see it. And there are others as well. But then I looked at the statistics for this. I think it's quite interesting. So in terms of pressures conceded, you've got the players at the worst end. Your Cameron Williams, he should not declare. 18 pressures given up. Will Campbell at LSU, everybody's raving about him. He gave up 18 pressures. He didn't play well last season. Neither of the LSU tackles played well. Jonas Savaiinaea gave up 15 pressures. And then you look a bit further down the list. Gray Zabel gave up 7. Wyatt Millam gave up 7. Josh Connolly 9. Membu 9. Banks 10. Considerably fewer pressures conceded. In terms of sacks, Cameron Williams gave up 5. It felt like 50. Savaiinaea gave up 4. But then you've got players like Banks gave up 1. Connolly gave up 1. Zabel gave up 1. Membu and Millam, 0 sacks given up last season. So you start to look at this, and the statistics match the order in which I had them graded in terms of performance. And then with the guards, Tyler Booker gave up 10 pressures and 0 sacks last season. If you said to me that the Seahawks left guard can give up 0 sacks in a season and only 10 pressures, sign me up for that. And Dylan Fairchild, one sack, 9 pressures. So I think that there's a lot of guys there. There's a lot of guys. They have to be able to draft one of these guys and plug them in. But Tyler Booker is the one that I think just is if you want someone who can play week 1, he can play week 1 and at a decent standard.
Yeah. Guys, get your questions in for Rob. We're live here. Rob's happy to answer any questions coming in. So direct them at Rob's way, and we're gonna be hanging out a little while longer. But yeah, real quick, Rob. I know we talked about not a great class for QBs, but if you were saying, okay, you know what, we're gonna start that process and maybe look in day 2, or day 3, whatever. But like, who would you say, hey, you know what, we'll take a flyer on this guy, just maybe some of his attributes, like you look at a guy like Jackson Dart's got some physical stature to him, aggressive. I mean, who do you like? A couple guys that say, okay, you know what, I wouldn't mind, the Seahawks just grabbing this guy, bringing him to camp, see what happens, if any.
Wow. I mean, it's not a great it's not a great list of players, because the problem you've got is, again, I think we probably will see quarterbacks drafted in rounds 2, 3, 4 this year, which has not been happening. But I think it's because players are going to get a little bit pumped up. I actually think there's going to be teams in the top 10, like that might go, we don't like Ward and Sanders, so we're going to take Abdul Carter or Mason Graham instead, or Travis Hunter, and we will take Jackson Dart in day 2. I think they may do that. But you to sort of, with Jackson Dart, just to pick with him, you can watch him play the first half against Florida, let's say, and think, this guy could be a first-round pick. Like, he's throwing the ball all around the yard. He's throwing it downfield. He's a good athlete. And you think, that's really impressive. And then in the second half, I think they scored 3 points. And he had 2 chances to win that game, 2 drives. And if they win that game, they're in the college football playoffs. And he threw an interception on the first drive. And then on the second drive, he threw an interception. It was called back because the defensive back stupidly dropped the football and didn't complete the catch. The very next play, threw another interception. It was as if, have another one, have another go. So you watch that and you think, he just can't finish. And it was the same against Kentucky. He was awful in that game. He just couldn't get it going. So, like, who is Jackson Dart? And on the one hand, you want to believe in the ability, that surprising ability to run with the football when he breaks contain. The arm is decent. The touch throws downfield are good. But there's just that, like, he's applied to go back to school for an extra season. So I think it speaks to the messaging that he's getting from the league is probably not what he wants to hear. So we'll find out very soon whether that's been granted. So that's Dart. But it's like, what do you take a guy like that in round 2 or 3 to take a chance on the arm? Because it might work, but you could easily just end up with a player who is out of the league in 2 or 3 year time. Like the last Ole Miss quarterback, who was Matt Corral, obviously had some issues, but you see what I mean? Like, there's players like that just come and go. And then you have somebody like Will Howard, who everybody will have probably watched this week, who's a good athlete. He's big. He drop back, throw the ball every now and again. You think, what a throw. Like, arm, tight window, great play. And then he'll drop back and, he hasn't seen that defender and he's thrown it straight to him. Or, he's fallen over his own feet when he had a free run to the end zone. Or, he's thrown a horrible red zone interception against Michigan or whatever. Like, and it's always been that way with Will Howard. Like, he gives you 2 plays that you think, oh, hang on a minute, there's a player here. And then there's a player that makes you think, no. And I can't imagine him being a starting franchise quarterback who's like above average in the NFL. To me, he seems like somebody who is probably going to get a chance, and it possibly isn't going to work out. Dylan Gabriel, small, arm strength not there, but he's got massive production. Riley Leonard can't throw. Curtis Rourke's got an ACL, Max Brosmer. I love watching Max Brosmer, but he's a Kyle Shanahan quarterback. He can't throw it downfield. He's more technical. He's more. I think if he lands with Shanahan, watch out, because he could replace Brock Purdy. But then there are some players that I think are worth mentioning. So I'm sorry, this is a long-winded answer, but you're talking about the thing that I obsess about. So I'm sorry. Seth Hennigan has got an arm. Like, I don't know if you've seen Seth Hennigan for Memphis. Like, he's got an arm. He set records for the school and the conference during his college career. I don't know whether Seth Hennigan has got it in him to be a starting quarterback. But when you watch the tape, he can drop, he can throw it downfield, he can make some plays. He has elevated his team to probably the maximum level that was to be expected of Memphis in this NIL era. Would I be prepared to take a chance on Seth Hennigan in day 3 to get him in? Yes. Tyler Shugg, apart from the fact that the name just does not sound like a franchise quarterback. I mean, imagine having a franchise quarterback called Tyler Shugg. It's hardly John Elway, is it? Or Troy Aikman. But Shugg has got an arm. he's had a good season. I mean, he's nearly as old as me. He's like he's 26, I think. He's been around forever. He was with Justin Oregon. But he's got an arm. He can make some plays. He's going to be at the Senior Bowl. Would I be open-minded about taking a flyer on him on day 3? Yes, I would. And then the other player that I want to mention, because Jalen Milroe can't throw from the pocket, is Quinn Ewers. Everybody hates Quinn Ewers. Everybody is ready to consign him to never, ever going to make it. I think there are so many issues with Ewers, his consistency, his health, his inability to have that sort of big moment that he had against Alabama last season, which has not returned this year. But there is arm talent there. There is natural talent. And maybe at some point in the draft, you take a chance on that natural talent.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Bryce?
I agree with a good chunk of what Rob said. I'm still really deep diving into some of this class to see, not just their latest and greatest games, but some of their early ones. Will Howard at the beginning of the year was someone I wasn't overly impressed with, kind of to what Rob's alluded to. The last, I'd say 5 games he's played outside of the Michigan game, which he was just god-awful, he's looked better. He looks like he's, and whether that scheme that they're doing or the talent they're playing has just got bad game plans, like he's looked better. Milroe's intriguing because of his athletic ability, but I don't think he's anywhere close to being a starting quarterback. Like we talked about Lamar Jackson being the running back that was playing quarterback. Milroe almost fits that more to a T than Lamar Jackson because Lamar's developed as a thrower of the football to an extent.
Lamar was 20 times better as a passer at Louisville.
Yeah, he was.
He won the Heisman.
Yeah, and that's the whole point. Is Milroe fits more of the he's a running back playing quarterback kind of role than Lamar ever did. The one for me that I'm going to be excited to dive into his tape a little bit more is, as a potential developmental guy that you take, and 2-3 years, maybe he shows you something in his flash because he does have some talents, is actually Kyle McCord. Kyle McCord's an interesting case to me just because I've seen his, he did have his year at Ohio State. They moved off to Will Howard, which does speak to some extent of, okay, what's the deal? Why did you do that? But then he goes to Syracuse where he doesn't have nearly the same talent and sets passing records at Syracuse. He's going to be an interesting one to study just to see what his, potential upside is and what his downfalls are. I see some people talking about Donovan Smith. I'm nowhere intrigued at all by Donovan Smith. Like I'd rather go trade for Joe Milton potentially. And that's something too that, I think when we talk about, the draft class and quarterbacks and this whole conversation we're having, Seattle may go acquire a guy that's kind of stuck. Joe Milton's a stuck guy. Maybe our next OC comes in and says, hey, I like what I saw from Joe Milton. Go get me Joe Milton and bring in Joe Milton. That could happen. Or, a Hendon Hooker or somebody else may potentially, show up that is an acquirement from the, free agency or by trade. So, but I kind of, next year's class, I think there's more potential, but like Rob said earlier, there's also some guys that may unimpress next year potentially. Like the last game Drew Allar played, I was, thinking Drew Allar's kind of maybe made something, and then the last game he played was not. I don't know, Rob, how you felt about watching his last game, but it wasn't exactly inspiring. The last Penn State game for him. So,
he's a very interesting player. What I would say about that is because I have actually got an opinion on that. So sorry. What was Michael Penix Jr.'s last game in college football?
Very true.
An absolute horror show against Michigan.
Yep.
And he was drafted 8th overall. And people have been saying this week, you can't draft Drew Allar or he can't turn pro. And my thought every time was Michael Penix Jr. against Michigan. That was a horrible performance from Drew Allar. It was really bad. But he has the tools and the physical ability to be an NFL quarterback. And
100%.
That's the key thing. Now, we've just watched Josh Allen play. I'd just go and watch Josh Allen play for Wyoming. It was awful. Like 50% passes, like 20-something interceptions in 2 years. He wasn't very good, but he was 6'5", 250 pounds, and he could run around. And then he went to the Senior Bowl and looked like someone had made him in a factory, like to order a franchise quarterback, please. And Josh Allen arrived in Mobile. Like that's the thing. Like if Drew Aller's measurables are the same as Josh Allen's. Now he's not. I don't think he is as good as Josh Allen was physically, but he has got the same height, the same weight. The arm is there. I'm not giving up on Drew Aller because he had a bad game against Notre Dame at all. Like eventually.
Oh, I'm not saying to give up on him at all. I'm just saying.
I'm not saying you. I'm saying that other people have.
Oh yes, 100%.
This week, I'm saying he can't play and all of this, and I'm like, come on. Like, eventually, here's the thing: unless the Seahawks are going to pick first overall or second overall and get somebody who is amazing, and more often than not, it's very rare that the first or second overall pick is amazing, unless they're Joe Burrow or Jane Daniels or whatever. But unless they're going to pick that high, you're going to take a chance on somebody, and you have to develop them.
Yep.
And if Drew Aller was in this draft and he's not made a decision yet, he's not reneged on his decision initially that he was going to go back to school, and I think he probably might do after that performance. But he's going to lose Tyler Warren, he's going to lose Nicholas Singleton, he's going to lose Abdul Carter. What's for him in Penn State? Like, they ain't going to be as good next year. So if he does turn pro, I'd keep an eye on that guy because he's a John quarterback, and if they are going to take a chance on somebody, that's the kind of prospect they're going to take a chance on.
I have one more name for you, Rob, that I want to know your opinion on in next year's class 2026, because we're kind of talking a little bit about Drew. The declared to go back this year is Garrett Nussmeier. What are your thoughts on Garrett Nussmeier? Because he's another one I'm very high on.
Really like Garrett Nussmeier. He would have been a first-round pick this year if he declared. He is gunslinger mentality, good arm, threw more NFL passes in 2024 than anybody else, and it wasn't even close in college football. His timing, his anticipation, his footwork, sneaky ability to avoid pressure and throw on the move, had big wins. I know LSU weren't very good, but LSU didn't have a good roster this year.
Yeah.
Everyone kept going about the tackles. The tackles stink. Like, they're both guards. Like, their receivers are nothing compared to what they used to have at LSU. So no O-line, no receivers, no defense to speak of. And the win that he had against, who was it against? There was one game where he fought back right at the end and it went to overtime and everything like that. You know, I can't remember who it was against. He is a legit NFL talent. And do not be surprised that if he takes a step forward next year, and even if he plays very similarly to how he did this year, I think he's going to be a high first-round pick.
Well, it's always interesting one reason I got really familiar with Garrett Nussmeier is because of his father, Doug Nussmeier, who I actually watched play when I was like 7 or 8 years old when he played in the CFL. And I thought, if this guy ever does actually have a kid, and if that kid's lucky enough to learn from him, he might turn into something kind of different and special, because having your dad be a professional quarterback, as we've seen with the Manning, kind of situation and uncles in that regard, sometimes it pans out, but it'll be, and his dad's been an offensive coordinator at high levels in college. It will be very interesting to see what happens with Garrett Nussmeier. If the Seahawks, in my opinion, were going to go up and try and acquire somebody as a quarterback, that would be, if they went up and did that and sold a couple of their picks, I would be very okay with that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think he's just a very talented player. And no one's saying that he's flawless, but I mean, who is flawless?
Yeah.
That's exactly. Part of the problem. You watch these guys and people expect, and it is the other thing. So Cam Ward, bless him, is stood in a pocket. There's no pressure most weeks. He can kind of hop around. He can drop backwards and launch it downfield to Tyler Restrepo, who's one of the best receivers in college football, or Elijah Arroyo, who's one of the best tight ends in college football, against overmatched, useless ACC defenses in games that ended like 60 points to 50. And everyone goes, that's amazing. And then Garrett Nussmeier is playing in the SEC. And people you cannot hold him to the same standard. If he was playing, like, Carson Beck will look better next year because he's not playing in the SEC. He's playing for Miami. That's why he's gone to Miami and the money. So you have to sort of judge accordingly. And Nussmeier made some bad mistakes during the season, but he has to learn from that. That's why he's going back, because he wants more football, to learn from that. And he will make mistakes as a rookie in the NFL. But on a technical level, he is beyond anybody else in college football. Physically, he's not. Technically, he is. So it's now matching up whether the physical traits are enough for him to be, let's say, a top 10 pick versus maybe a slightly lower first round pick. But he is a very talented, unique player. And if they don't take a quarterback this year, he and if Allah doesn't declare, they'll be the two quarterbacks at the top of my list for 2026. Because people will say Arch Manning. Arch Manning needs to play some football and actually needs to show he can throw the football. Because at the minute, he's just a running quarterback.
Yeah. What are your one question here? What's the confidence level the front office will take a QB? And like, would you be surprised if they don't? Because we even last year were thinking, maybe they'll take someone in day 3, day 2, the Spencer Rattler names like that we're throwing around, and then another draft goes by. Would you be shocked this year if they don't at least get another guy just in camp, whether that's even a day 3 guy?
I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if they didn't draft a quarterback, but I don't think that's a problem. Like all you can do, like this is the thing is, it's another year they haven't drafted a quarterback. And look, I myself have said they need to start drafting quarterbacks. So, it is somewhat hypocritical of me to then, but I've changed my opinion. You're allowed to do it, yeah. And I've corrected myself because I think it warrants correcting, and this point needs to be heard. They have to grade quarterbacks accordingly. If you don't think the quarterback can start in the NFL, you do not draft that player. Yeah. There's no point. And they haven't whiffed on anybody early in the first, second, third round. They haven't gone off any player that's gone somewhere else and they should have drafted them. Like nobody thought Brock Purdy was going to be an NFL quarterback, and all power to Kyle Shanahan for making Mr. Irrelevant a quarterback. But you can't complain about that. They weren't going to draft Spencer Rattler. Like I rated Spencer Rattler quite highly as a talent, as a prospect, very naturally gifted going into the draft. But I spoke to someone, and I talked about this quite a lot in the build to the draft, who just said they wouldn't go near him because there's just certain things that, he relayed some of those things to me that happened during his time at Oklahoma. And I think NFL teams did not feel like they were going to move off some of that stuff, that he hadn't done enough of a job to convince them he was changed at South Carolina. And that's why he fell to, the 5th round. But if the Seahawks don't think, no, we don't want this guy. Like, this is not a guy who fits what we're looking for. He's not a Seahawk. You ain't going to draft him. So they're not going to draft him. And people will now, the new thing is Joe Milton. Like, Joe Milton's had a good game against the Bills backups. So why didn't they draft Joe Milton? Well, why didn't anybody else draft Joe Milton? Like, he was a 6th round pick. The reason they didn't draft Joe Milton is because he was bloody awful for Tennessee. That's why. Like, he has just to watch the tape. He was disgustingly poor. Like, he was just a big arm. Like, a big arm and an athlete. His accuracy was awful. So it's okay to say you should have taken a 6th round flyer, a 5th round flyer on Joe Milton. But there's a reason why I was a 6th rounder. And the team that took him, New England, took him after taking Drake May. So they weren't taking him as we think this guy's the future. They were taking him as like, oh, well, he's left. Well, I guess we'll bring him in because he's maybe like the highest graded player left on the board. So I think it's about whether the player is there. If the player is there, John is going to run to the podium to draft a quarterback. I guarantee you he is desperate to take a quarterback. But if that player is not there, he ain't going to do it.
Yeah. What about this one from Save the Geese? Why, I know you've talked about Darnold in your show, and why can't the Hawks have a Viking type season next year? Imagine they hit on a good OC, improve the line, get them more physical, and run more. I mean, it's a lot of things to hit on. But yeah, I mean, you look at a team like that. You had Kirk Cousins in there, and off he goes, and then you bring in Darnold. You draft JJ McCarthy, he gets the injury, and a great defensive coach over there. I mean, what's your thoughts on something like this?
Geese is right, absolutely right. They could do. They play in a weaker division than the Vikings do, so they don't have to play the Lions and the Packers. Their record next year is their schedule next year is weaker than it was this year. So there's an opportunity there to have more wins. And yeah, it is really about sort of fixing that offensive line for me and getting the offensive coordinator thing right. The quarterback thing will play out as it plays out. And if it's Geno Smith, then it's Geno Smith. He is not the long-term answer, but Are they going to be able to bring the long-term answer in? I don't know. If they're not, they're going to have to kick the can down the road. I'm at peace with that. That's, you can't force this into reality. There's loads of teams who want a young franchise quarterback. The Seahawks are not unique in that regard. And then if it's somebody else, it's somebody else. So I do think there's a chance for that. It's one of the reasons why I'm intrigued by Josh McCown as an offensive coordinator, because if he can come in and work a bit of magic with a reclamation project like they've done with Sam Darnold and maybe draft somebody, then there's opportunities there to have that kind of a season. Yeah.
I'm going to throw one other name at you, Rob, for a potential OC candidate before we finish up with a couple more of these comments and then let you get on your way because we know it's late over there. But what are your thoughts on Davis Webb?
What, the Broncos quarterback coach?
Quarterback coach.
He's 29 years old.
I know he's young.
Which means that he is 11 years younger than me. So when I was his age, he was a teenager. So
but just the reason I throw that name out is because of the comment you made earlier that the person you're going to have to get is going to have to grind, do 16-hour days, and someone older may not want to do that. That just may not be in their wheelhouse. And so, you got a guy that's done some pretty good things, I think, with Bo Nix this year to a point. But, Sean Payton spoke highly of him, which you can take that with whatever you want, grain of salt wise. But I just think it's an intriguing name potentially, because even if we say we have to do this in 2 years again, or even next year, there's another young quarterback guy. Because that's one thing. The next OC, you also want to have a guy that knows or can get someone on the staff that knows how to develop a young quarterback when that does become a thing.
Well, so my first thought on Davis Webb when you mentioned him is that I wonder if he is one of those people maybe who is getting a reputation boost by the fact that Sean Payton's doing a great job. Because look, Sean Payton has done a masterful job this year. I know he's not the most likable bloke, but he's done an unbelievable job with Bo Nix and that Broncos offense. And you kind of wonder, how much of the Davis Webb, is Davis Webb just riding the coattails really of Sean Payton? Is he actually that good? I don't know. I mean, this is where working in a front office, you've got to know who the next sort of the guys upcoming are. Because when Sean McVay was hired as a head coach at the age of 31 or whatever it was already sort of being talked about that he was like this young genius. And it wasn't a huge shock that he got a head coaching job. Is Davis Webb a young genius? That's probably what for people in the league to tell us whether he is or not. If he is, then I'm all for it. If he's just someone who's gone into coaching a little earlier than typical because he was a player and it didn't really work out for him. I know that he was quite a highly rated player. He was coming through and injuries kind of put paid to when he potentially might have had to have a proper NFL career, and he's gone straight into coaching. Is he just sort of young and therefore maybe 3-4 years away from doing this? I think he was linked to a job, wasn't he? And then it was kind of dismissed. And I think Ian Rappaport said that he's going to be in the conversation for jobs in the future, but not now. It's too soon. So that's all I really know about him in that regard. So it may just be a little bit premature for him at 29.
Yeah.
I mean, I was not ready to do anything at 29, so I thought I did.
Yeah. I mean, man, I look at that. I don't know too much about him, but I just think Mike wants somebody in here just more established and not, let's see how high the ceiling is, but let it play out. There's a lot of things, Rob, man, we appreciate you hanging out. This has been awesome. I know it's late over there, coming in live here, taking in some questions. It's been good stuff. And that's the thing. It's kind of week one here. We already made a big splash with the Grubb firing. We're sort of in that process, let the dominoes fall. But it's going to be an interesting offseason, to say the least. But Rob, before we get you out of here, what do you got coming up on your channel, and what else are you working on, and where can everyone find all your stuff?
Well, I'm writing a lot of stuff at the minute. There's pretty much an article every day. I have got to go to a conference tomorrow, so that run may end. We'll see. I mean, just check out all the stuff. There's a lot of draft stuff on there. I'm talking a lot about the offensive coordinators. We have the YouTube channel. If you go to Rob Staton Football, you'll find it on there. And we do a lot of stuff on there, whether it's instant reaction to stuff, to breaking news, or videos talking various topics. We do live streams. So there's an awful lot to get into. And as we get nearer to the draft, I mean, I know I've got the feelers out. We're hopefully going to get some interviews with players soon. An interview, hopefully there's a couple of good ones that I'm working on that hopefully we'll be able to do soon with other things that are not players. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and SeahawksDraftBlog.com for everything else.
Good stuff, guys. Go over to Rob's channel and definitely do SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Rob, we love your work. We appreciate you coming on and hanging with us, and we'll talk in the future here for sure.
Thanks, guys. Happy to be here.
Rob.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
Rob. Go Hawks.